Dunton Locks Pottery is located 2 miles south of Detroit Lakes, off Highway 59 by Dunton Locks Park. Open daily 11 to 4. For a closer look at Phil Holton's wood turning, call 346-4780.
My name is Phil Holton. I'm a wood turner. I'm very happy to welcome you to my shop today. Today I'm going to tell you about the craft of wood turning. And it's a very ancient craft, about 3,000 years old, maybe 3,500 years old. It arose pretty much simultaneously in Northern Europe, in Africa, in China, in India. And it's very interesting to hear kind of about that. But we start with wood. So whether little pieces, straight pieces, or even starting from the log itself, this is what I start with. Then I move to a wood lathe where I carve it as it's spinning. So it's a very interesting, sometimes they call this the first power tool, because you can use power that isn't your own. Maybe your brother-in-law would spin it for you back in the old days. And it was always the first tool to be mechanized. So it had wind power or water power, steam power, electric power. The lathe was always the first thing to be mechanized. Then I'm going to show you some of the things that I make, whether it's some of the things that I use. This is a stool of cottonwood, and it tells you something about wood turners because we like to use unusual wood, not real straight grain stuff from the lumber yard, but this has got some very curly grain here. It isn't exactly round. So I love to have things around me that are much more interesting and organic than, they definitely are not plastic. So I want to show you some of the things that I like to make. And let's start with some furniture. I showed you the stool there. Here's another stool. This is one of my favorite pieces that I've ever made. This is a Windsor chair, a kind of a famous English design, but I call this a peacock chair. So there's a fellow in Denmark named Hans Wegner that I was inspired to do this. But very comfortable chair, very springy, and each wood is kind of chosen for its strength for any particular task here. So to be a wood turner, you need to know something about wood. You want to use really interesting pieces that have got interesting figure to them. So you don't want it to be ordinary. You want it to be a one-of-a-kind piece. I'm most of all a bowl turner. So these are some of the kinds of things that I make. This would be a real standard thing that I make. And when I have people come in my shop to learn why this is something that like what they would turn. I love the contrast here between the sapwood, the white sapwood, and the dark wood. This is black ash, which is probably as distinctive a Minnesota lake country wood as there is. And it's the natural edge of the outside of the log. This is the way it would have come out of the tree. And that's kind of a puzzle to people too. And you see it isn't exactly round. I'll let you puzzle out why it isn't exactly round. These are made of burls. So I like to work with lots of burls. This is black ash. This is cherry. And I love this grain of burls is just unbelievably beautiful. I use it very efficiently so that when I'm turning this, I can sometimes turn 4 or 5 or 6 bowls out of the inside of one. And so this is kind of a youngest child of that burl in a way. Sometimes we work in collaboration. This is Guy Paulson, who did the Yemkamp Center in Moorhead. He's a carver, and he did a table prayer that he carved on the outside of this. This is in basswood. Some of my bowls aren't round at all. So this is walnut. This right here is Caragana, and you can see people have a hard time figuring out how that came out of a tree, but it's spun like a propeller. It wouldn't be the first thing that you would want to do. I think it just says freedom and lightness and featherweight. These are some bowls that I turn in collaboration with some Rosemalers. And so they are Norwegian turners, or Norwegian painters, and instead of doing very traditional kinds of things, they're people who have learned to do the traditional, and now they're branching out. So this is Karen Jensen, this is Ken Magnuson, that do just a magnificent job of taking the bowls that I've turned and go from there. So this is one of my basswood bowls after I finished turning it, and this needs to be kind of blown off a little bit and a finish, and then they'll take it from here and they'll paint it. I do platters, so you see the platters back here. I have a little trouble with my platters because I'm a preacher, and after I do my platters, everybody says, Phil, you're doing offering plates again. You got to get out of this rut. But some of us, we're just stuck with who we are, I guess. These two right here are a Polynesian design called a calabasa. And a calabasa in Spanish is a gourd, so these have the shape kind of a gourd. And they're a usable plate, but they don't have a flat bottom. So that's it's kind of an interesting, not only do you toss your salad, but you kind of chase it around in there a little bit. Then you can do lots of other things besides bowls as well. This is a hollow vessel, and so these are hollowed through this little hole in the top. Makes it quite a bit more complex to do that. Takes a lot of time, but this is thin like an eggshell. And then it's threaded in a process on the lathe that's done by hand. And then this finial has been made for the top, and it's got 3 different kinds of wood in it, which I think make it look pretty interesting. But I do quite a few of hollow vessels. These are 2 kinds of black ash burl. They're waiting for a top yet, but see, I like to use, it's got some bark, it's got the burl in it. I think they're very interesting. This is not one of my pieces, but it's a box that my friend Ron Williams made. And a box is actually not necessarily square, but a box has a cover. And so this is done with cherry, and this has a black ash burl cover that I think is very, very pretty. One of the things that I like to work with is wood that is spalted. This is wood that is, this is mountain ash, and it was kind of bland until it started spoiling in the log, and so I have a red, white, and blue bowl. Very interesting, I think. I also do a number of things between centers, it's called. So this is my own design called the Crinsakaka. I learned to do this by starting with baby rattles. This is a very old design. But I knew that I could do a little more complex stuff. So again, as a preacher, I've been to lots of weddings and wedding receptions, and the Norwegians like to do something with something called the Crinsakaka cake, groom's cake. And so I kind of took this idea and cut these rings loose, but more rings and on an angle, and I think it makes a very interesting design. And I can make those pretty small too. You can see how that isn't very big. That has 8 rings, just about the size of a thumbnail. This is my friend Steve Green from Perham that makes tiny miniature little vases, some of them glued up of different kinds. This is actually piano key ivory worked in with ebony. Aren't those beautiful? We can do some things. These are some wine stoppers, sort of thing you might put in a wine bottle when you're not using it. Here are a couple of pens. So this is a kit. There are lots of beautiful kits. We kind of use some nice wood. The nice thing about a pen is everybody knows what to do with it. So there are wood turners that specialize in pens. Here's some that I use that I have the kids making. So here's an egg. So we have all sorts of different things that wood turners can make, besides even like stairway spindles and columns of buildings and things like that. So we wood turners are pretty versatile. We love to do what we make the chips fly and make beautiful things. And I hope you'll keep coming to my wood turning shop, and I'll show you more and more of these things. So thanks so much for joining me in the wood turning shop today. I'd love to help you find a beautiful piece of my wood turning for your home or for a gift, or to teach you how to turn wood yourself at one of my workshops. I have 2 videos that would also help you learn to turn.